Material UI just released a new version, version 5, and it has been rebranded as MUI, and it has some excellent new components, including this new component called the stack component. It's ideal for one-dimensional layouts, which really just means anything simple that's horizontal or vertical, and you're not looking for a grid. You just have a couple components that you want to get aligned really quickly and easily, and this stack component is the way to do it. It has a ton of spacing props, and it's easy to style, and so we're going to dive into a lot of these different props, and there's also an excellent new CSS prop called SX that lets you pass in all kinds of different CSS values. So stick around and we will dive in. Welcome to another episode of The Clever Dev. Today we're going to take a look at the stack component. So I've got some default, some kind of a framework set up here with, we've got stack and a couple of items in it, very similar to how you see it in one of the examples from the docs. So just a bare bones example here. To save us some time, I've set up use styles, but we don't have any styling. I don't have any props on the stack. We're going to dive into all of that together. So let's get to it. Really, the stack is all about spacing and alignment. So it's intended to give you a quick alignment utility or component for one-dimensional layouts. So that means you got to stack things vertically or set them horizontally, and I'll show you how to do both of those things. So with that said, first thing we're going to do is we're going to get into the props for spacing, and then after that, I'll specifically look at the new SX prop for really any kind of styling or CSS values can be passed into that, but then I'll also do kind of the more traditional MUI styling via use styles and classes here. So let's take a look first at perhaps the most important prop, which is the direction prop. So there's some pretty cool stuff. First, the first thing I want to highlight is you could say it has breakpoints kind of built in. The theme breakpoints are built in. So you can just say XS, and then you can say, let's say column, and then we can go ahead and say small, and we'll do row. So right there, then that'll allow us to go ahead and set alignment based on the screen size. So pretty cool there. You can see that. So without the styling that we're going to add, then it's a little bit hard to see. But there you go. That's a pretty cool thing, just that they have that built in like that. There's actually quite a few more values than just column and row. So for example, we can actually say column reverse. So now you see it was item 1, 2, and 3. Now it's 3, 2, and 1. So there's row reverse. There's a couple of other props. But primarily I expect people would be most interested in the column and the row values there. The next thing we're going to do is I'm actually going to add the component prop. So this is something that if you've used Material UI 4, then you're familiar with it. You can actually just directly pass in a prop. So a pretty common one is paper. And let's actually look at the DOM here. This is a pretty important aspect of simply understanding the new stack component and how it's actually rendering in the DOM. So this div right here is actually our stack. So here we see item 1, item 2, and so on. So this is the actual div that Material UI is rendering as the stack component. Really, it's just an element in the DOM, but the stack component, so to speak. So we see MUI paper classes on there, but let's strip off the component prop and we'll see what happens. Let's go retrieve that component again. Here we are. So now you can see there is one class on there, but there's basically none of the default classes, like the default Material UI or MUI API that we're used to. It's really a bare bones lightweight component, so that's actually a pretty nice thing. It's kind of interesting to note this class, and as we add more props, it'll actually, for I think it's the spacing prop that I'll add, it'll actually add another class in here. So that's how some of these props are applying their stylings, is actually through kind of an auto-generated class there. But anyway, I'll go back and add this paper component. If you wanted to be able to target via stylings, then having the paper component on there just gives you, like, you can target this MUI paper-root class, for example. You can, of course, target it just with root, and using that root class in our class names. However, it is kind of handy to be able to target the MUI paper-root. Just gives us something very specific to target. But regardless, we'll keep going with the actual props that we can add on here. So next up, I will look at the spacing component. So once again, we have access to those breakpoints. They're built into spacing. Let's go ahead and save that. There we go. Code Sandbox has realized that the formatting was getting rough, so it flipped it down for us. So there we go. So you can tell a little bit that there is just a little bit more room in here, a little bit more spacing because I set it to 2. So let's take a look at that for a moment, see what we see in the DOM. So now we've got this padding 8 here. So that's what that spacing on extra small spacing 2 added, was padding of 8. So I could expand the screen and it would increase the padding. So these values are not 2px. These are values that are padding values from the Material UI theme. So they're default. You could customize them if you wanted to, but we're not going to do that here. Another interesting spacing prop called gap, spacing as in it deals with spacing, is gap, and we'll see what the difference with gap and spacing is. So spacing was this padding down here. Gap is actually a value at the stack level. So let's go look at styles, and there we see it, gap of 16. So we can actually expand that. We see row gap, we see column gap. So pretty interesting. That's a pretty useful value there. It's not the same as margin, so something I'll have to play around with more personally to to get used to it. But it threw me for a loop because I couldn't figure out where it was for a little bit. But yeah, it's a gap CSS value actually. So you can actually set width. I'm not going to do that, and I'll show you why. But we could, or I'll do it real fast, but then I'll strip it off. But you'll see why. So it actually messes with our ability to have breakpoints in there, or I'd have to make the width conditional on whether on what the direction prop is, or something along those lines. Or I'd have to set height as 120 also, or something along those lines. But I think it's best to simply not have a width value, especially for this example. One thing I want to mention. So I'm going through several props here that are not actually listed on the Stack API docs in the MUI docs. And it's kind of funny to me, MUI just does that sometimes. So if I remember correctly, I think gap is not specifically listed. Width is not specifically listed. But they make them available, obviously, like they're taking effect here. And interestingly, there's several ways that we can actually add gap or width. We can add them here. We can add them in the SX prop that simply looks like this, that I'll get into in a little bit. And we can add them via the styling up here. But for now, let's keep going. I'll leave that SX just commented out. Next up is a divider prop. It's similar to component, except that it is actually, it's not changing the element at the root level, it's changing, or adding, really, it's adding an element in between the items. So you can do a number of things here, or you could pass in really whatever kind of component you wanted, but I'm just going to keep a simple div, and I will say, let's say with a style prop, just some inline styling here, and I will set the width and height, and background color. Kind of get a homegrown divider here. Let's let it render, and then we'll take a look at that. Now there is an actual divider component in MUI. It was there in MUI 4 also, and that's probably what most people would use here. I'm just kind of playing around to show you that you can add pretty much a custom component if you want to. So there we go, sandbox, code sandbox rendered that. So I'll just click at the high level here, and we can see once again our stack element, or the component that is rendered as a div, but that's the stack component. We've got our first item, and now we've got these additional items in between this div that I added, so you can see the styling in there, and then there's our next item. So I'll leave that in there. And just for getting ready for the later sections, I'll go ahead and add class name, same old as it has been in Material UI 4. So I'll just add that class as .root. No styling changes here because our root class doesn't have any styles defined in it yet. So with that said, let's take a look at this SX prop before we move to styling the use styles. So reading about SX, it's basically it's a way to pass in any valid CSS values. So like I mentioned, we could have accomplished spacing through it. We could have accomplished gap values through it. But for example, I'll just do background color. And we have access to our typical theme values like primary in the palette. So there we go, we got some blue coloring there. We can add border radius. I think, by the way, I have a link to all this code, to a write-up of it that I did that has links to this code sandbox. And I may not keep the values exactly the same in the video as I have them in that article. For example, I think I have border radius 2 in that article. But sometimes if you do the border radius, it's a little hard to see, but it kind of cut off some of the corners there, so I'll just leave that at 1. And so really, I'm not going to dive much further into the SX prop right now, but at a high level, like I said, it can take in any valid CSS props, and I'm trying to remember, I think I might have been able to do gap through it. Let's just play around with that and see. So strip my gap off. So we've got gap through there. Of course, thinking about it, then gap is a valid CSS value anyway, as we saw in the DOM when we were looking at the style section. So anyway, yeah, pretty cool prop there. And I'm excited to dig more into that probably in a future video, or at the very least on my blog. So that's all the props I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at the styling now. One more thing I want to mention. I'll have a link to, there's actually a great Udemy course on Material UI or MUI, and I'll include a link to a page on my site that I have about it, because sometimes, at least at the time of making this video, then I have a coupon code for it. I actually contacted the creator of the course. It's 40 hours, and there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and so on. So I contacted the course creator, and he gave me a coupon code for the lowest value, the lowest price he could possibly make it, and they're not permanent. They only last 30 days, but I'm planning on just checking with him every 30 days and trying to get a new coupon code on there. So I'll include that link if that's something you're interested in. He really did a good job with the course he created on Udemy. So check out the link that I have, and you'll see the coupon code on there on my site. So let's look at the styling now. Here we go. Styling via use styles. So this is the same thing that we're used to from Material UI 4. And I'm not going to go super crazy on it, because probably if you're using Material UI, then you're used to it. Sometimes it can be really challenging to target exactly what you want in these components, but Stack is, honestly, it's pretty, since it's so lightweight, then it's actually pretty easy. You don't even really need, you don't need nested selectors for nested components and so on that are, like the text field is actually a composition of several components like input and so on. And so that one can be very challenging to style properly. But this one, if I set background color here, there we go, it took effect. And that's important to notice too, that this actually overrode the styling that we set in the SX prop. And same thing I can do with border radius. I can override the border radius value here. I'll do a little bit more of an interesting one. We can use the first child pseudo element here. And we'll target that item. So it's important to notice, this isn't specific to the stack, but in general, what first child does is it actually, if I didn't have this space, then it's actually looking at the stack itself and saying, okay, I am the first child. Me, the stack, is the first child under whatever its containing div is. If we have this space in here, then it's saying, okay, I'm at the root, which is stack. Look inside of stack at its children and select its first child and color it. Give the background color a red color. So one more thing I'll add is that since I have paper as the component from the component prop, then I could actually target this MUI paper root if I wanted to. We don't really need to here because it's at the same level as this root class, but that would be another way to select. So with that said, then I hope that this was helpful. This is brand new stuff, at least here in September 2021 for Material UI. You can see over here they have MUI version 5. Looks like they actually released 5.0.1, which is very new. But even 5.0.0, I think, was released this week or last week from me recording this. So anyway, I hope that this was a useful video with this big, they really make some big changes, and this component is a pretty awesome addition to their library.